So let's see, I see a couple more people joining. But thank you so much for everybody who has joined us already, and welcome to Huio Ko'olau Poko's Outreach and Educational Series. My name is Lane, and I'm going to be speaking with you guys about Heia and the modern impacts within a historical watershed. So I'll talk a little bit more about myself as we await for people to join. Like I said, my name is Lane Morrow. I'm from Northern Idaho originally. I moved to Hawaii about 6 years ago to study marine biology. During my undergraduate career, I worked closely with algae and studied intertidal ecology with the program called OPIHI. It stands for Our Project in Hawaii's Intertidal. Through them, I got a lot of citizen science based education and community outreach experience. And shortly after graduating, I really wanted to expand my knowledge in Hawaii, in different Hawaii ecosystems. So I applied to be a KUPU Americorps member through their Conservation Leadership and Development program. So they provide an 11-month term. And if you make it through their first round of applications, they actually send out to other corporations to see if they'll hire you on. And I'm so thankful that Huio Ko'olau Poko decided to take me in, because I've just learned so much within estuarian ecosystems and habitats, which is still connected to the intertidal. And really that's what inspired me to create this presentation and talk about this with you guys today. So today we are going to go over who we are, what encompasses Watershed Health, the history of Heia, and projects within Heia, how it's all connected, and how we can progress forward. So Huio Ko'olau Poko, us. We are a nonprofit watershed management group, and we were established in 2007 to work with communities to improve water quality through ecosystem restoration and stormwater management, focusing specifically in the Ko'olau Poko region from Makapu'u to Kualoa. We implement innovative on-the-ground projects that effectively manage and protect water quality and natural resources in Hawaii. It's our mission to protect ocean health by restoring the Aina and Mauka makai. So since these beginnings, HOK has been working to achieve the goals outlined in the Ko'olau Poko Watershed Restoration Action Strategy by implementing restoration and low impact design projects that ultimately aim at protecting water quality. This is done in partnership with stakeholders, including interested citizens, non-governmental organizations, government, educational institutions, and businesses, all while using and focusing on sound ecological principles, community input, and cultural heritage. So in addition, with proactively addressing water quality with restoration projects, HOK develops outreach and educational opportunities for multi-generational learning. So this includes field trips, in-classroom education, maybe pre-pandemic, right? Outreach presentations like the one I'm giving today, and volunteer opportunities alike. So first, I just want to go over hydrologic cycles and our watersheds. Healthy watersheds not only affect water quality in a good way, but also provide greater benefits to the communities of people and wildlife that live there. A watershed is an area of land generally designed by a valley or a mountain where all water from rain or springs flow into a common body of water. Hawaii's watersheds converge into a stream and eventually lead out into the ocean, while some watersheds flow into a lake, wetland, or estuary. In a natural undeveloped watershed, the water moves from Mauka, the mountains, to makai, the ocean. And along the way, the water is being absorbed by plants and soils and slowly replenishes our groundwater aquifers. Unfortunately, in our current developed communities, water runs over pavement instead of following the natural water cycle. Human activities, along with urbanization and other types of development, have severely altered the natural landscapes and threatened the health of our terrestrial and marine ecosystems. These dynamics between the land and water largely determine the health of our waterways. and the types of aquatic life found in a particular area. Effective protection of aquatic ecosystems recognizes their connectivity with each other and with the surrounding watersheds. Unfortunately, human activities have greatly altered many waters and their watersheds. So for example, the Environmental Protection Agency reports over the last 50 years, coastal and freshwater wetlands have declined in size. Surface water and groundwater withdrawals have increased by 46%, and non-native fish have established themselves in many watersheds. A national water quality survey of the nation's rivers and streams showed that 55% of the nation's flowing waters are in poor biological condition, and 23% are in fair biological condition. And those conditions are based off of the Environmental Protection Agency standards and how they defined what poor and fair ecosystems are. So in Hawaii, water has been managed as a public trust for centuries. Before the arrival of Captain Cook, water was managed within the ahupua'a. It was the kuleana of everyone as stewards of the resources within their ahupua'a to malama i ka aina. In the 19th century, the Hawaiian Kingdom held Hawaii's rivers, streams, seashore, and ocean in trust for all of its citizens, and granting land ownership interests during the Great Mahele that took place in 1848 to 1850. The Hawaiian Kingdom expressly reserved its sovereign rights to encourage and even to enforce the use and enjoyment of lands for the common good. In maintaining the sovereign right, public trust was declared upon all the waters of the kingdom. Today in Hawaii, as in every community in the world faced with population growth and virtually unchecked development, there is a growing imbalance between water use and water resources within our ahupua'a. Simply put, aquifers are emptying faster than rains can recharge them. Streams and wells are adversely impacted because of diversions for development and large agribusinesses. So in Hawaii, a watershed is similar to the Hawaiian concept of an ahupua'a, which is Mauka to makai land division determined by streams, mountains as the boundaries. Within each ahupua'a, Hawaiians practice a sustainable and responsible stewardship for the land, which resulted in a desirable balance of the environmental, social, and cultural resources within each ahupua'a. So HOK uses the ahupua'a structure to manage our current watershed practices and target specific problems within Ko'olaupoko. So to the picture to the left, you can see how Native Hawaiians used to use these resources and valleys to manage their water input through their agriculture, their lo'is, which are filled with taro or sweet potato, basically filter out a lot of the sediments getting channeled through rain events and things like that. They have upbai, which are ditches that they dredge out that kind of manages the water throughout the lo'i. And then you have some lower gardens down here. Typically at the mouth of a river, there would be a fish pond. So yeah, in Ko'olaupoko ecosystem, degradation and land-based pollutants are the leading threats to ocean health. So now we can see the Heia watershed here to the right, and those waterways, and you can see just how much development has taken place on our coast, right, and along our waterways. A lot of these leading threats, the problems often are the result of urban development, agriculture, habitat alterations such as streams lined with concrete, loss of wetlands, non-point source pollution, on-site sewage disposal systems, and introduction of non-indigenous flora and fauna, which all contribute to water quality and loss of ecosystem function. So the extensive salt marshes of Heia inland from the fish ponds, or loco, were not suitable for cultivation back in the day, but fringing them to the southward, flanking both sides of Heia stream, from which they are irrigated, lie the vast terrace lowlands of this ahupua'a. So right in here is where we see a lot of the restoration work happening today. In 1935, that area was largely planted in commercial taro. The southern portions of those lo'i were irrigated from Kalimukele stream, which turns southward and flows into Kaneohe, while the small streams named Pu'olina supplements the Heia on the north. These terraces extend up the main stream through the junction of Haiku Stream and Ioleka'a Stream and flow from the west and southwest respectively. Awesome. So I did want to give you guys a brief overview of the agricultural timeline of Heia. So under the Mahele of 1848, the Ahupua of Heia, which encompassed 88-acre local Ia and the north end of Makapau, went to the father of Bernice Pauhani, Bishop Abner Paki. Cane sugar was introduced to the Ko'olaupoko in 1865. Kalea Ula Ula Heiau was at Kealohi Point was destroyed for Heia Sugar Co. Mill, which was constructed by John McKeague. In 1883, a railroad was installed for the sugar company. It made trips once a week between Heia and Honolulu, exporting sugar and returning with supplies and goods. In 1903, Heia's sugar company closes and cattle ranching takes over 2 years later, operated by George W. Rowan. And in 1928 was when mangrove was introduced to Hawaii. So mangrove in Hawaii is different than mangrove in other places in the world in its habitat functions. So in places like Florida and the Caribbean, mangrove is highly prized for to help with coastal erosion, for habitat, for different species in the areas. But in Hawaii, it just did its job a little bit too well. So it was actually introduced in the late 1920s, early 1930s for coastal erosion. It just did its job too well. So for example, in Heia Stream, it used to be 50 feet wide back before mangrove was introduced to Hawaii. And now at our site at Heia Estuary, you can jump across the stream at its smallest point. So mangrove really is considered an invasive and detrimental plant to poor water quality by dropping large amounts of leaves and other organic matter, which results in nutrient loading and anoxia, sedimentation, and hypersalinization. So you can see the prop roots to the left in the photo. Those really just kind of like just sit there and collect all of the leaf litter and everything that goes through. So when we do have mass rain events, things get stuck and crowded, sediment piles, and now you have just really deep layers of peat that build up on the bottom side. So a hui of grassroots organizations, including Paipai o Heia, Kakao Oev, and Hui o Ko'olaupoko, with support from Kupuna and the community, are all working to remove invasive mangroves from parts of Heia watershed. It's also worth mentioning that these are not the only nonprofit organizations doing great work in the Heia watershed. We also have Papahana Kuola, Huiku Maoli, located near Kupuna Spring, right up here. So I do want to just take you through our watershed and some of the projects that we have worked in upper Heia Stream, and then we're just going to be working through nonprofit organizations leading down to the fish pond in this way. So I first wanted to start with upper Heia Stream restoration project. It was a 4-year grant partnership between Hui o Ko'olaupoko, Papahana Kuola, Huiku, and Kekula, with project funding from the Environmental Protection Agency and the Hawaii Department of Health. The project's main goal was to restore native vegetation along 4,000 feet of riparian habitat on the upper Heia stream using community and volunteer support to complete the majority of invasive species removal, native outplantings, and project maintenance. Of the 4,000 feet of riparian habitat, about 2,500 linear feet of stream bank was removed with invasive species and outplanted with natives. Close to 13,000 plants were put into the ground in just over 2 acres, and 600 feet of coir logs were installed to control erosion. So you can see in this top picture here, it's just a bunch of dense haau. And here is where we, or Hui Ko'olaupoka, placed those coir logs to help with coastal erosion. And then we planted ahuava on top of that to help balance all of that out. When it was all said and done, the removal of 4 roll-off containers of junk from the stream banks was collected. And we had over 3,000 community participants. Additionally, we worked with the residents of the Heia watershed regarding techniques to reduce fertilizers applied to individual lawns and other methods to improve watershed health. So Kakao Oev was established in 2006. It's a nonprofit whose mission is to perpetuate the cultural and practices of Native Hawaiians. Like I said earlier, it's situated in the Ahupua'a of Heia, the Moku district. In 2010, they acquired a 38-year lease from the State Hawaii Community Development Authority to implement Mahuahua Iohoi, which means replanting the fruit of hoi, a community-driven vision for a 405-acre area within Heia wetlands. Since starting this endeavor, they've produced over 50,000 pounds of kalo and poi and increased its relationships with restaurants and direct-to-consumer sales. Awesome. And we just have some historical photos here, snagged from their website of what it used to look like. So this is the bridge going over. These are old farming land here, and this is something of what it looks like today. All right, so now going on to a very prized site of mine, the Heia estuary. The goal of the Lower Heia Stream Habitat Improvement Project is to improve the quality of water and fish habitat in Heia Stream. So since 2015, Hui Ko'olaupoka has systematically been working to remove invasive mangrove and other non-native vegetation from 7 acres of riparian estuarine areas along 1,440 linear feet of Heia Stream. You can see here on this site is where that 7 acres is encompassing. And then this is where Pai o Heia is, and right up here is where Kakao Oev is, right up Mauka of the bridge from us. The goal of these efforts is to improve stream functionality, restore habitat for native aquatic species through improved fish passage, open foraging areas for shore and marsh birds, and remove invasive plant species to allow for the reintroduction of native plants. This project site, like I said, is approximately 7 acres of Heia State Park, which is leased and managed by Kama'aina Kids. We hold an adoptive park agreement with the Division of State Parks for the 7 acres of the park that we manage. To date, HOK has cleared mature invasive mangrove from the entire 7 acres and replanted 5.5 acres with nearly 4,000 individual plants, consisting of more than 30 species. Through 5 years of removal and native outplanting efforts, we have documented not only positive effects on water quality and fish populations, but also soil health and an increase in native marshland bird presence. In this time, HOK has hosted over 4,200 volunteers to this project site to learn about and lend a hand to the efforts. It's really awesome. We managed to do quite a lot of work this year, even under the pandemic. Thankfully, KUPU was able to secure some CARES Act money, and we were supplied with an additional 11 KUPU members who were there part-time through the pandemic. And so these are some of our before and after photos earlier in the year of 2020. All right. So before I get into the nonprofit Paipai o Heia, I wanted to explain to you guys a little bit more about Hawaiian fish ponds. They're unique and advanced forms of aquaculture found nowhere else in the world. The techniques of herding and trapping adult fish with rocks in shallow tidal areas is found elsewhere in the world, but the actual walled coastal ponds are unique to Hawaii. There are 6 styles of Hawaiian fish ponds, most notably the local Ia Kuapa. They were technologically advanced and efficient, as their purpose was to cultivate pua, baby fish, to maturity. Their creation was the result of the Hawaiians' deep understanding of the environmental processes specific to our islands, as well as their connection and observation of the food resources on the Aina and in the Kai. Ocean fishing is dependent to a great extent upon conditions of the ocean and weather. We have high surfs and storms and other associated weather phenomena that influence and interrupt most fishing practices. So therefore, back in the day, this was a great resource for Native Hawaiians when the ocean wasn't deemed safe to go out fishing on canoes. Yeah. It's unknown who commissioned Heia Fish Pond to be built, but it likely required hundreds, if not thousands, of committed residents to pass and stack rocks and coral for approximately 2 to 3 years to complete the wall. The first recorded owner of the pond is High Chief Abner Paki, who I talked about earlier. He was the Konohiki of the Ahupua'a of Heia. He received the majority of the lands of Heia at the time of the Great Mahelia of 1848. His wife was High Chiefess Laura Konia, and after their passing, their daughter, Princess Bernice Puahi, received the lands of Heia. Princess Puahi then married Charles Reed, bishop, who after passing managed her lands in the Bishop Estate. And today, the fish pond is still owned by Kamehameha Schools, which was formerly known as the Bishop Estate. So a little bit of history about just like the land, like the ownership passage throughout time. Heia Fish Pond is a Kuapa style fish pond enclosing 88 acres of brackish water. The Kuapa or wall is built on Mauka, a fringing reef, and extends away from the shoreline completely, encircling the fish pond. It was built approximately 600 to 800 years ago by the residents of the area. The Kuapa is possibly the longest in the Hawaiian Islands, measuring an estimated 1.3 miles or 7,000 feet. A unique feature of this fish pond is that the wall forms a complete circle around the fish pond. Most other fish pond walls are either built in a straight line or as a semicircle connecting one point of shoreline to another. Not only is the Kuapa of the Heia fish pond extremely long, it is 12 to 15 feet wide and compact along certain sections. The wall is composed of 2 separate parallel basalt walls set 12 to 15 feet apart. The film material contained between the 2 walls is mostly coral, but along certain sections of the wall, there is dirt as well. This compact style of wall slows water flow and allows the fish pond to maintain a base water level at the lowest tides and forces more water to the makaha or sluice gate. This fish pond has 7 makaha, 4 along the seaward facing wall that regulates the water the saltwater input, and 3 along the Heia stream that regulates the freshwater input. By allowing both fresh and salt water to enter the pond maintains a brackish water environment and creates the ideal habitat for algae or limu to proliferate. By cultivating limu, much like a rancher grows grass, the kia'i or guardian caretaker could easily raise herbivorous fish and not have to feed them. Fish that live in Heia fish ponds include ama, ava, pualu, palani, oholehole, and papio. The fish pond is also home to different species of crab, shrimp, and eels. So when I first took my tour on the fish pond wall, my bosses did a great job of explaining how a fish pond really attracts fish into it. And so they did a great description, and they described it's like when you're going outside and checking your mail in the morning and you walk next to your neighbor's place and you smell them just cooking up a storm. You smell the eggs and the bacon and the potatoes and all of that, right? The fish pond kind of acts in the same way as where they're farming specific algae, taking out invasives that are attracting fish. So at low tides, when we have these, or any like large water flowing activities, so after storm events or mass tides, when the water goes out, it brings all of that scent that the limu creates and invertebrates living in there and extends out into the ocean, which hopefully then will attract fish back into the fish pond. So OPIHI is still working on connecting the fish pond wall. So it's not active, it is private property, but if you come out and volunteer with us, maybe we can give you guys a tour of the fish pond wall too. But I think this is a great transition into my next talking point about how really all of our watersheds impact the reefs. So Kaneohe Bay represents one of the most intensively studied estuarine coral reef ecosystems in the world. Despite a long history of anthropogenic disturbance from early settlement to post-European contact, the coral reef ecosystem of Kaneohe Bay appears to be in better condition in comparison to other reefs around the world. The island of Moku'olo'e, Coconut Island, in the southern region of the bay, became home to the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology in 1947, where researchers have since documented the various aspects of the unique physical, chemical, and biological features of this coral reef ecosystem. So after the arrival of the first Europeans in 1778 led to further introductions of plants and animals that radically changed the landscape. Subsequent development of the plantation agricultural system led to an increased human immigration, population growth, and an end to traditional land and water management practices. That's really when we first started to see just mass development too fast for our own good, right? We didn't realize all of the devastating impacts this is going to have on Hawaiian waters. So the reefs were devastated by extensive dredge and fill operations, as well as rapid growth of human population, which led to extensive urbanization of the watershed. By the 1960s, the bay was severely impacted by increased sewage discharge along with increased sedimentation due to improper grading practices and stream channelization, resulting in the extensive loss of coral cover. The reefs of Kaneohe Bay developed under estuarine conditions and thus have been subjected to multiple natural stresses, which probably honestly helped us a lot when we started developing and causing all of these anthropogenic or human impacted changes to the environment. So the natural stresses include storm floods, a more extreme temperature range than most oceanic reefs, high rates of sedimentation, and exposure at extreme low tides. Deposition and degradation of organic materials carried into the bay from the watershed results in low pH conditions, such that according to some ocean acidification projections, the rich coral reefs in the bay should not even exist. Increased global temperature due to anthropogenic fossil fuel emissions is now impacting these reefs, with the first bleaching event that was recorded in 1996 and a second more severe event in 2014. The reefs of Kaneohe Bay have developed and persist under rather severe natural and anthropogenic perturbations. To date, these reefs have proved to be very resilient once the stressor has been removed. And I'm going to go through a little bit more of that in detail. But the major question remains to be answered concerning the limits of Kaneohe Bay reef resilience in the face of global climate. So during my undergraduate career, we actually had guest speakers come out and talk about taking different corals from Kaneohe Bay because they have adapted so well in climate change and different, natural stressors and anthropogenic stressors caused by humans. So in the past, going over sediment, dredging altered the bay and displaced enormous amounts of soft substrate, which was dumped around the bay. And that's definitely not good for coral recruitment, as they need a hard substrate to colonize. Today, there's a lack of permeable surfaces, meaning like our watersheds are covered by pavement, and that sends heavy plumes of sediment into the bay during major rainfalls. This is also bad for corals. For nutrient overloading, sewage outfalls during the 1970s. During this period, oxygen levels in the South Bay were low due to the oxidation of organic material, which by that I mean sewage. You have all of that bacteria in the water column that's respiring and taking the oxygen out from the water, which created respiratory stress and promoted, again, anoxic conditions for corals. Moreover, reduction in light penetration from increased productivity. So when you have a mass rain event, there's often a bloom in phytoplankton because it's carrying all of those nutrients down from the streams and our waterways into the ocean. And when you have those mass blooms, that affects the light penetrating through the ocean to get to the corals. So then they're not getting enough nutrients that they need. The sewage effluent discharge decreased species diversity, increased eutrophication, and substantially altered ecosystem structure away from a coral-dominated ecosystem. So we've also had invasive species introduced to Hawaii. Since the 1950s, 19 species of seaweed were intentionally or accidentally introduced to Hawaii. Among these, a few were successful in expanding their abundance and distribution in Kaneohe Bay. Abambilia amadelpha is a cryptogenic species, and it competes directly with other native species, in particular the native seagrass, Halophila hawaiiana, and it's hypothesized to have arrived after 1981. Acanthophora spicifera is another common one in the coastal regions all over Hawaii. It's otherwise known as spiny weed, and it's believed to have been accidentally introduced from Guam. It spread throughout the state since the 1950s. Gracilaria salicornia is probably the most current one in the bay today. It was introduced in 1970s to evaluate its practicality as an aquaculture food product, and has since spread immensely, inhabiting intertidal and subtidal to about 4 meters in depth. The seaweed is most prevalent on the fringing reefs, but can also be found on the barrier and patch reefs throughout the bay, growing in large, low entangled clumps that overgrow and kill reefs, building corals. So again, there's just smothering out the corals, trapping a bunch of sediment inside. There are several Kapophycus and Euchemus species were also introduced to Kaneohe Bay. I think that might be the most popular, or I guess one that people know readily about, just because it really took over. So this species grows in strands that may extend over 1.8 meters in length, with diameters up to 2.5 centimeters. So it is a large algae compared to others. Since its introduction in 1974, surveys have revealed that it spread 9 kilometers in 25 years, increased its distribution, and have invaded new habitats. So these invasive species pose significant negative effects on the entire reef community by overgrowing, smothering, and killing reef-building corals, and consequently stripping the reef of its complexity. And that is coupled with overfishing. So when you have reefs that are overfished and less herbivorous reef fish feeding off of algae, coupled with large nutrient flows into our ocean after rain events, or whether it be submarine groundwater discharge carrying cesspool nutrients into our waters, you're really starting to see a shift in dominance from like a macro algal dominated reef to more cryptogenic species that are low lying. They don't really branch up and stalk like this. They're kind of just flat. And they really smother out the reef, and they don't have anything eating them down or keeping them in check. I'm gonna go back one more. This figure is from a study that was taken or like done in Kaneohe Bay. It covers the changes in percent coral cover in response to major impacts during the Western era. So starting in 1778 to 2015, based on the best available data that they had. So perturbations of freshwater kills are in blue and bleaching events are in red. And those are indicated by arrows in this timeline. So here is where we have massive inputs of freshwater, and I'll go into those dynamics and how that works with coral a little bit later. But you'll see like a mass rain event and then a decrease in coral coverage, like a mass killing, and again here, and a couple of bleaching events as well. So coral reefs in Kaneohe Bay periodically experience natural environmental disturbances from extreme low tides, freshwater inputs, and increased to sea surface temperatures. Extreme low tides have been exposed to corals to desiccation, temperature changes, and freshwater from rainfall. So freshwater kills are rare events that are caused by lowering salinity during severe storm flooding and runoff events that modify the structure of reef communities. These events have been documented in Kaneohe Bay during May 1965, and again during January 1988. And recently, a less severe event occurred during flash floods in July 2014. For a frequency of reoccurrence of approximately 25 years. So during the 1965 flood, the freshwater discharge within a 24-hour period was calculated to be equivalent to a surface layer of 27 centimeters over the entire bay. A lot of water. Along with reduction in salinity, freshwater caused temperatures on the adjacent reef flat to decrease by 1 to 3 degrees Celsius, and an average irradiance levels to decrease by 10 to 20% in the 1988 flood, and by 55% in the more recent 2014 flood.
Lane, can I ask, we have a couple questions. So what year were you just describing?
So this first, sorry, let me get my pointer out. This first freshwater kill was during May of 1965. So we had like a huge rain event here, and then a big drop off there with that coral decline.
And then another question in the chat says, what year do you think extensive research has been done on bleaching of reefs? For instance, well, let's see, 1780, I imagine not much was done.
Right. So
yeah, when do we think of a focus on, or when did coral bleaching become something that was starting to be researched?
I can't like specifically say worldwide. I'm not actually too sure, but I know like the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology that came to the islands in the 1950s, I believe, is what I had written down here. And so I know that they've been monitoring the reefs closely. And Kaneohe Bay, just reading throughout all of the scientific articles and papers that I've gone through, dates back years and years. I don't know how well their sampling methods were and what technology has evolved since then. But this, you know, obviously we didn't have those resources in 1780. So this is just a compilation of like documented events that they can kind of defer from and try and create this story of why these mass killing events have occurred.
While we're paused, do we have questions from anyone else? Okay, sorry to interrupt you. It was just like,
no worries. I
wanted to know numbers and dates. Tell me again. Okay, please continue.
Yeah. Awesome. So yeah, that basically covers the extent of freshwater kills. So the gist is that freshwater is lower in pH, right? So, and a lot colder than salt water. And so the temperature change and all of the nutrients that the freshwater brings in, it creates basically like mass blooms of phytoplankton algae that can, what am I trying to say? Decrease light in the water column. So corals are not getting like enough water. It also just dumps a bunch of bacteria into our water column. They start to respire and use oxygen and take that out of the water as well. And this just goes over that phase shift that I was talking about when you have that low herbivorous pressure and high nutrient loading to our reefs. You do see that phase shift. There's not as much depth to our reefs. It's not as dynamic. They're kind of just starting to turn into rubble and become flat, which doesn't create a lot of habitat for reef fish. Awesome. Yeah, and I think that pretty much summarizes my my presentation. If you guys have any questions, let me know. And if you want to get involved, please visit our website, huihawaii.org, or you can email our outreach coordinator, Sana, and RSVP to some of our work days. Yeah, thank you guys.
Do you want to give one more little plug for KUPU again, since I know that their applications are open right now, and we do have some people watching on Facebook as well that might be interested? Absolutely, I would love to. You know, I guess I'm just going to talk more from a personal standpoint with KUPU. After graduating, I graduated in marine biology, and I knew I loved intertidal ecosystems, but I didn't have too much experience outside of researching algae. And KUPU was a great way for me to put out my little feelers and really learn about other Hawaiian ecosystems. And so it gave me the opportunity to work with Hui o Ko'olau Koko on an 11-month term. I think I have four months left. What month are we in? April, May. Yes, so it's a really cool organization. They give you a stipend living allowance. And also once you complete your 11-month term, you're rewarded with a scholarship that you can apply towards past student loans or future loans. Yeah. Any other questions? Some awesome comments coming in for you, Lane, congratulating you. It looks like Yvonne is in the middle of making a comment. So while we wait for her, I'll just say thank you guys so much for joining us. This educational series we are hosting every month on the second Saturday. All of our past recordings have talked about propagation, different types of propagation from seed to cuttings and air layers. We've also done some site visits with partner sites. And next month, our other KUPU member, Maya, will be giving a presentation as well. So you can feel free to use the same login information that you were given for today's event to log on. And we'll also be posting these onto our Facebook Live, and the recordings will go onto our YouTube channel within the next week. Okay, looking back at Yvonne's comment, she said, approximately what percentage of reef fish have we lost due to shifts to more dominant cryptocoral species?
Okay, so I wouldn't go as far as saying that the algae is killing the fish. I will say that our reefs and oceans have been overfished for a long time. And with increasing anthropogenic effects, or the effects that humans are bringing to our reefs in the form of pollution, just waterway passage and all of that, it has decreased the fish population. And with the low herbivorous reef population, there's not as much fish eating that macroalgae off the reef and keeping it in check. And so when that happens and we have these massive nutrient implodes into the reef, the algae takes that as a resource and grows very fast. A lot of invasive species of algae reproduce asexually through fragmentation. So if you have a piece of limu and the tip of it breaks off, the small piece can go and regrow into a whole new colony. And so I think it's just the loss of coral coverage and depth of the benthic floor to where it's flattening out. There's not as much space or habitat for reef fish to inhabit. I hope that answered the question.
Awesome. And Sana did drop our YouTube channel there. We have time. If anyone else has questions, please, you can feel free to take yourself off of mute and ask questions. Otherwise, Sana, do we have any questions coming in on the Facebook?
No questions, but anyone watching on Facebook, feel free to just leave your comments or questions in the comments, and then we can go back and answer them too later on.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us and for supporting Lane, our in-house limu expert. Love having our KUPU members have a chance to kind of spotlight their interests and things that get them fired up to talk. So thank you, Lane, for all your hard work going into this. And thank you everyone for joining us. And we will say ahui ho to everybody. Aloha.